my name's Tony. This is my channel, Tiki Guitars. I have never done a video before for guitar making. This is my first time ever using iMovie. I made this on my MacBook using iMovie, so I'm kind of learning as I'm doing. Same thing with my guitar building projects. I'm learning by doing. I've been making guitars since January of 2026, so just a few months ago. I did not have a workshop. Now I have a workshop. And it's a small workshop. It measures 7 feet by 8 feet. Most of the tools that I have are kind of on the wall behind me. And so this video is about my first guitar ever. It's really just a series of still photos that I'm kind of making into a movie because I didn't have a camera up and going at the time. And so I just want to show people, here's what I've done. And the whole idea of this channel is for people that want to build a guitar but have limited space, limited tools, little or no woodworking experience, which is kind of how I started. I had no woodworking experience at all. I had very little tools. I had maybe a screwdriver and a couple of hammers, and that's about it. So everything on the wall behind me I had to go acquire in the last couple of months. The first one I made, though, I made using nothing but hand tools. I used a Japanese pull saw and a Shinto rasp, both of which I had to go buy. So this video and this channel are going to be about here's what the tools I use are and how to make a guitar. And with that, let me show you kind of what I have made. Thanks for joining. Okay, so this photo just shows the piece of wood that I was using. It is a piece of swamp ash that I got online from StewMac. I used a Japanese pull saw to cut this out in a series of square lines. In this photo you can kind of see the beginnings of the guitar. I've drawn from a template some of the outlines on there, and then I used the pull saw to begin just cutting a series of straight lines, the end of which, by the time I'm done cutting it out, you'll be able to see the basic outlines of the guitar. The other primary tool I used in building this guitar was a Shinto rasp. And that is basically a rasp made of a bunch of old jigsaw files, it looks like. And most Telecasters do not have either a forearm cutout or a belly cutout, but I wanted those on my Telecaster, so I used a pencil to hand draw a line for the belly cutout and also for the arm cutout. And then just using a Shinto rasp, I gradually started taking away material on there until I had these two cutouts kind of the way I like them. So in this photo, you can see the belly cutout, again, accomplished using nothing but a Shinto rasp. In this photo, you can see the basic shape of the forearm cutout and the pencil lines that I used to mark off that particular section of the guitar. So in this photo you can see the beginnings of the neck. I made a lot of mistakes on necks, but I wanted to try and carve the truss rod channel using nothing but a chisel. So I took 2 steel rulers and I clamped them to either sides of where I wanted the truss rod channel, and I used a 1/4-inch chisel that I got from a local hardware store. And I just started hacking away at it little by little. This is before I realized that chisels are not sold to you already sharpened. You have to sharpen them yourselves. I did not know that. I know that now, but when I carved this one out, my chisel was actually not sharp. So what you see is that you actually can carve out a truss rod channel using nothing but a chisel. It's kind of sloppy though. And so, full disclosure, at some point in this process, I decided to kind of add a little bit to hand tools. And so I went out and bought a router and a particular router bit to make a truss rod channel. So that means I had to learn how to use a router. More on that in a bit. So here's the router that I bought. I bought a Bosch router. It's a plunge router, and they make good tools and I like it a lot. I just wish that it had a light underneath it because it's really dark underneath it and it's difficult to see what you're doing with it. So I had to read the manual and learn all about how to use a router. I had never used one before. Also in this photo you can kind of see what ultimately became my workshop. I didn't have a workshop, I didn't have a workbench, so I went out to a local hardware store. I bought a piece of plywood that was 2 feet by 4 feet and 2 sawhorses, and I just placed the piece of plywood on top of the sawhorses, and that was it. That was my workbench. I soon discovered that doing this, you create an enormous amount of sawdust. So I got some plastic and I taped it up around the area of my workshop, which is in my basement. And right behind that plastic is the furnace. It was January when I was doing this, so the furnace was running, and we have forced air in the house, and so I didn't want that sawdust being forced all over the entire house. So this is my router that I eventually used on that, and boy did I make a lot of mistakes on that. Using that router did work. You can see the truss rod fitted into the channel there. I used a hot rod truss rod that I bought from StewMac, and they make a particular router bit specifically designed for that truss rod, which I used, and it worked really well. One of the things that I found out later is when you're using a router, as I mentioned, it creates a lot of sawdust, and one of the places that sawdust goes is into the router collet. And every time you're done using your router, you need to take the bit out and take the collet out and get rid of the sawdust on there. Otherwise, what will happen is your router bit will actually slip in the middle of something you're doing, and it happens lightning fast. And in that instant that it slips, the project that you're working on is suddenly ruined, and now you kind of got to go back to the drawing board. You'll see some pictures from that here in just a bit. Once I had the truss rod channel routed out, then I had to cut out the shape of the neck. So I used a template and drew that on there, and as you can see in this, I used a Japanese pull saw to cut the basic shape out. One other thing to notice here, at the bottom of the truss rod channel, you'll see that the bottom of it is a little bit wider than the rest of the truss rod channel, and that is to accommodate the width of the adjusting nut. And the way that I made that channel a little bit wider was I just kind of traced the shape of the nut and the length of the thing, and I used a 1/4-inch chisel to just gradually work away at the material until I could fit the entire truss rod in there, nut and all, in its channel. Cutting out the fretboard like the neck, I used a handsaw for that. I didn't use a Japanese pull saw for that because it was just a bit too rough, so I had to go out and buy a coping saw with a really thin blade and a fine tooth count on there to cut out the fingerboard. Fingerboard in this case is something called Pale Moon Ebony, which I bought from StewMac. All right, so here's where a router mistake began happening. My first neck that I bought, I used, as I said earlier, I used a 1/4-inch chisel to try and carve out the truss rod channel. I decided I didn't like that, so I bought another neck blank, and I bought all this stuff from StewMac. I bought another neck blank, and I decided after I got the truss rod channel that I was going to try and use that router to remove some of the wood on the headstock so I could thickness it down to the correct thickness. What I did when I ordered my neck blank is I accidentally ordered 2 of them, and I ordered them too short for the Telecaster, so that is why the neck looks kind of chopped off on top. So I decided I would use one of these things as a practice piece of wood to try and work on thicknessing the headstock down to the appropriate thickness with a router. And that seemed to have worked. So stay tuned for what happened next. All right, so here's what happened next. The 2 necks that are kind of in the middle that look like they're full-sized ones, not the one with the tuner holes in it, but the other 2, you can see on there where I had router bit problems, and that is because I did not clear the sawdust out of the router bit collet. And as a result, the router bit slipped and switched depths on me right in mid-cut. And it happened so fast, I never knew it until a couple of seconds after I moved beyond the part where I was cutting. And then kind of with horror, I looked on that piece of material there and realized that something dreadful had gone wrong, and knew in an instant that, uh-oh, something happened and I'm going to have to go buy another neck blank. Ultimately, I had 6 neck blanks, each of which was I made a new and refreshing mistake on, until finally on the 7th neck blank I got it correct. So I'll tell you more about that here in a couple of slides. At this point in the build process, I did not know what had gone wrong with the router. I found that out later on. But at this point, I did not know what had gone wrong. So what I decided to do is use a saw, which I had to go out and buy. I had to use the saw and make a series of parallel cuts right next to each other, very close to each other, and then, to the correct depth that I wanted, and then use, again, a 1/4-inch chisel and start chiseling out the pieces that I had cut one by one. This is something that I learned online from a video from a guy called T.C. Hicks. He had a video where he built a Telecaster using nothing but hand tools, and that was really my inspiration for this. This method, which I used on my second guitar, again, because I was still a little bit afraid of router bit slippage at a critical point like this, this method works really, really well. And it takes, don't be afraid of doing this. It takes very little time. It takes more time than using a router, unless you have a problem. But it's effective. It doesn't take all that long, and it yields you a reasonably flat surface. And whatever is not flat about it, you can fix that with some sandpaper and maybe an electric palm sander. This is the 1/4-inch chisel that I used to start hacking away at this stuff. Now, when you chisel these things, you start from the outside of the piece and you chisel in towards the middle, and you stop about halfway. The risk is if you try and go all the way across the piece, you might get tear out on the other side. So you start chiseling on one side, get about halfway, then you turn the piece around and you chisel again from the outside towards the center. And when you're done, it looks pretty good. Okay, so in the introduction to this, I said I made this thing using nothing but hand tools. I guess I should amend that and say I used primarily hand tools. Like, how do you poke holes in the headstock to put the tuner heads in there? Well, you got to drill them. So I had to go out and get an electric drill, and I wanted to make sure that I drilled straight. So and I didn't want to spend the money, or I really thought that I had the room for a big drill press. So I got this thing from a company called Miles Craft, where you can take a hand drill, put it on there, and it will drill straight. And that little tool worked great until the shaft broke and snapped off on me, destroying the tool itself. So although I used that tool in this picture and I was pretty happy with it for the first build, when it broke on me, I discovered that that is not really a good solution. And so for my second build, I actually ended up going out to Lowe's and I bought a 12-inch drill press, which is kind of a beast, but it should not break on me the way that the Miles Craft one did. When it came time to cut fret slots in this, I bought from a company called CB Giddy. I bought a fret slotting miter box. It's called their Quick Slotter system, and they have a couple of different sizes out there. The Telecaster is a 25.5-inch scale, so I bought that one and their specific saw, and it works okay for doing what you gotta do. It will get your frets sawed for you. It will do them accurately. I've used it on 2 guitars now, and I don't really have any complaints on that. It's just that one miter box is good for one scale size. So if you want to go build something like a Les Paul, which has a different scale size, then you're going to need a different miter box. And guess what? Those people don't sell one that size. So I eventually went to StewMac and I bought their fret slotting miter box. And what you do for that is you buy templates for whatever scale you need, and currently they're out of all of the scale templates that I need. So for my next one, I'll have to either stick with the same scale and the same miter box, or wait until they have some new equipment in stock. So my first attempt at drilling tuner holes on what I was hoping was going to be my neck that I was going to use didn't work out so well. I didn't have a real good guide on there, and I wasn't super accurate in my placement of tuner holes, and that was one of the many mistakes that I made on necks and headstocks. So this one ended up for me being a practice neck, but you know what? You learn stuff when you practice things, and just because you mess up on one piece of wood, well, guess what? They make more wood, and you can just go get some more. It does become a little bit expensive So if you're thinking you're just going to buy one of anything and get it right on the first try, well, you're probably not. But if you're okay making mistakes and learning from the mistakes that you made, you're going to learn a lot, and it's not a bad thing. So I inlaid fret dots on this fingerboard. You can see them there, and for the most part they're centered up except for on the 12th fret. Don't know how this happened, but somehow I didn't quite get them symmetrical and lined up. So I did better on my next build, but on this one, you know, sometimes you kind of got to accept a little bit of quirkiness in your build and say that, well, that's what makes it custom and makes it unique. But that wasn't that hard of a process. What I used to do that was just a hand drill, and I stuck a piece of tape around the drill bit for the depth that I wanted, and I stopped drilling when I reached that depth. But something that I learned, and this again is why I ended up buying a drill press later, something that I learned is when your drill bit gets hot, the tape that you stuck around the bit to use as a depth slot or depth gauge will get loose and slide, and now your depth is all out of whack. Okay, so when all of that was done, now it was time to radius the fretboard, and I ended up radiusing mine to 7¼ because when I bought fret wire from StewMac, pre-cut fret wire, 7¼ inch, was the only thing they had available. So that is what I went with. And I bought from StewMac a 7¼ inch sanding block, and I took double-sided tape and I stuck a piece of sandpaper to the bottom of the sanding block and went to town. Now in this picture you can see a couple of rails. These are things called Bora clamps, and you can get them at your local hardware store or at Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that. And I drew a center line on my workbench. Then I taped, using double-sided tape, I taped the fretboard down to it, centering everything up. And then I took those two Bora clamps and I put one on either side of the fretboard so that as I sanded the fretboard, I could not accidentally sand crooked or sand sideways. You know, the block had to stay within the two clamps, and it made for kind of a nice jig. I learned in doing this that it does work, it is effective. You draw the little pencil lines on there, and when they're all sanded and gone, then you've finished. But it takes 3 to 4 hours of sanding to kind of get there. So I think in the future I'm going to try and use a different tool, which Solo Music Gear makes, and it's a nice tool. It's a little radius sanding or radius routing contraption that you stick a palm router on, and it makes quick work of that. So I'm looking forward to using that tool on a subsequent build. Once the fretboard was radiused, well, now it was time to install fret wire. So I used my 7¼ inch fret wire that I got from StewMac, and used a fret hammer to pound it in there, and that worked out reasonably well. Now what you find out when you sand your fretboard to the correct radius is that a lot of the fret slots that you cut previously start disappearing around the edges of the fretboard, and so you need to re-saw those. When you do that, you have a couple of choices. You can either use the same fret saw that you used to make them in the first place, which if you do that, it's easy for that saw to slip and you can make mistakes. Or you can buy a miniature saw, and I bought one from StewMac, and it's used really for cleaning out frets, and they use it for if you have a bound fretboard, and it's a small little thing, but it works really well. So you kind of got to resaw your fretboards, your fret slots, and when you do that, you need to make certain that your frets are actually deep enough so that none of your frets end up sticking out of there, because the fret tangs are going to be so deep, and the fret slot needs to accommodate all of that fret tang. And I found out the hard way that I didn't quite do that, and so I ended up doing a complete refit on there. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. So here's some more views of the various neck mistakes that I made. On one of them I tried to patch some of the mistakes that I made, and that didn't work out really well. One of the mistakes that I made was when I tried to carve the neck, I tried to sample the neck, and I carved it in such a way that I actually ended up exposing the truss rod channel on the bottom, so that was a mistake. But another big mistake that I made was kind of measuring wrong on the thickness of the headstock. The headstock needs to be 15 millimeters thick. And I got all turned around when I was looking at the diagrams for the tuners that I bought, and I thought I had it correct, and so I thicknessed my headstocks down to 10 millimeters instead of 15. Well, that was too thin. So these are just some of the necks that I made. These are the 6 that I made mistakes on. One of the mistakes I made when I had everything else done correctly, I had the neck shaped right, I had the thickness of the headstock right, I had the tuner holes drilled right, I had all of that stuff done right. It came time to carve the neck, and you can see kind of up around the 12th fret where I actually carved one neck a little bit too narrow up around the 12th fret, and so when you stuck the fretboard on top of it, it overhung the neck up there. So I made that mistake up on the 12th fret, and I think up near the 1st fret, and so that kind of rendered that neck unusable. What I did subsequent to that is I used double-sided tape, and I taped the fretboard to the neck blank so that I could carve it out and have more of a visual reference on where to stop carving and just how thick to make the thing, rather than just relying on pencil lines that you may have drawn. And that method I found worked out really well for me. I was able to, on subsequent builds, carve the neck out just fine, and I used nothing but a Shinto rasp to carve that neck out. For a really good tutorial on how to do this with some good camera work and everything else, check out a guy named T.C. Hicks. And he's a European guy, I think he's Belgian, but he's got a really good video on how to go about doing that. And basically what I did at the 1st fret and at the 12th fret, I used a saw to make some parallel cuts, just like I did thicknessing out the headstock, and I got it down to a particular depth, and then I chunked those bits away with a chisel, and then I used a Shinto rasp to get the correct curvature for a C-shaped neck that I want on both the 1st and the 12th frets. Once that was done, then it's just a matter of using that same rasp to kind of join those two C-shaped areas. So now that I had both a neck and a fretboard that were properly sized and properly thicknessed, it was time to glue them together. So I just used tight bond glue on there like kind of everybody does. Now, one thing I will say about doing this, some people will say that you got to watch out for slippage because the glue is slippery when you put it on there. And a little bit of that happened to me on a second build, but in a different kind of a way. So some guys will say that you should try using locating pins, and I had a devil of a time trying to use those things. I attempted that stuff, but man, it was really hard to get them lined up right, and when I drilled them, I thought I was as accurate as I could be on the underside of the fretboard and the top of the neck blank. I used the template. I had locating pin holes already in the template, and I had it all squared up and trued up and everything else, and they did not fit anyway. So what I learned when you're gluing your fretboard to your neck blank is, if you're careful and you go slow, and when you clamp the thing together, just use your fingers and make certain that it's not sliding around on there. And as long as you got the thing laying flat on your table, it's probably not going to slide around on you all that much, and I think you'll be okay. So I've done that on 2 builds, and I haven't had any trouble by not using locating pins. Alright, so with the neck and fretboard glued to each other, it was time to try and see if they would actually fit the slot from the template, and hopefully I did not make any mistakes. So one of the things that I tried to do was make a neck pocket using nothing but a chisel. So you can see that in this picture. It's the bottom of the 2 neck pockets, and it looks like a hack job because it is a hack job. So on the next attempt, I used a router, and I routed the neck pocket to the correct depth. And this piece that you see here is just a blank, a scrap piece of wood that I had, and I wanted to just kind of attempt making neck pockets and see if the neck that I made would in fact fit the neck pocket from the template. And guess what? It did. Once I figured out that my neck would in fact fit a neck pocket from the template, now it was time to try and route a neck pocket on my actual guitar body. So I was very careful with this. I used the template, and I used a couple of router bits that have ball bearings on them, so they ride along the top of the template. You just got to make certain that you're really careful in setting up your depth. So when you put your router on top of the template, don't forget to account for the thickness of the template. So the neck pocket is 5/8 of an inch deep. The neck template, or something like that, I forget what it is, and the neck template is something like 3/8 of an inch deep, so you got to make certain that you account for that when you are routing your neck pocket. But it does work. At this point in my guitar build, I'm starting to feel like I'm making real progress, and this thing is going to end up looking like a real guitar and has a reasonable chance of actually working. So I decided I would dry fit all of the component pieces together just to get a bit of a visual on how the thing would look. Now before I bolted the neck to the guitar body, I wanted to make certain that I had everything straight. So I redrew my center line on the guitar body, and I went to a local hardware store and I bought one of these laser levels just to make certain that everything was straight right down the center line. You know, sometimes if you're a little less than accurate on routing out your neck pocket or carving the shape of the neck can wiggle around a little bit in the neck pocket. So before you drill some screw holes into the back of your guitar, or try and mount the neck, I wanted to be safe on that and make certain that that the thing was going to get attached squarely and straight. So I found using a little laser level, inexpensive tool, was able to make certain that I was going in a straight line. In this photo you can see also that I have already routed the control pocket on there, so I'll talk more about that here in a picture or two. So for the control pocket, the guitar itself is 1 3/4 inches thick, and the control pocket is 1.5 inches thick. So you only got 1/4 of an inch of material beneath the bottom of the control pocket. And so I needed a router bit that would do the trick. Now my Bosch plunge router that I bought goes down so far, but it bottoms out with all of the router bits that I had bought from like StewMac. I looked on StewMac for a really long router bit and they didn't sell one. So I looked on Solo Music Gear and they didn't sell one. So I ended up going online on Amazon and I bought a fairly long router bit that could make it all the way to that 1.5 inch depth, plus the thickness of the template that I was riding on. So you might have to hunt around for one of those someplace. And it's the same kind of a bit, it's got a ball bearing on the top, so it rides along the edge of your template, so you can kind of get the dimensions of the control cavity correct. One of the things that connects to a control cavity is the jack that you're going to plug your guitar into. So just make certain that you measure your actual jack and the jack plate that cover it up, so that you drill an appropriate sized hole into there. I used a Forstner bit, which I did not have. I had to go out and buy that. I bought lots and lots of tools for this build. But you make sure you're using the correct drill bit to drill your jack hole to connect up to the control cavity. So once I drilled the control cavity and routed that out, by the way, I used a Forstner bit to chunk out a bunch of material on there before I just sunk the router bit into the thing. The other cavities remaining, you got a bridge pickup cavity, and you have a neck pickup cavity, and then you have a wire run cavity. And the neck pickup and the wire run are the same depth, but the bridge cavity is a different depth. So you'll see in this picture that I penciled out the bridge location on here. So a note about that. Even if you're using a template, it's easy to make a mistake somewhere along the line in measuring something, and you never know where that's going to happen until, you know, much later in the game. And this is so common with kind of anything you do along the line. So before I drilled out and routed out the bridge pickup cavity, I wanted to make certain that I had the scale length correct. So again, this is a 25.5-inch scale. So meaning you take a ruler and you measure from the inside of the nut, from the fretboard side of the nut, to the middle of the 12th fret. And that distance should be 13.75 inches, half of 25.5. And then from the center of the 12th fret to where the saddles go should be another 13.75 inches. And those saddles should be able to move forward and backwards so that you can adjust your string tension and your intonation and so forth later on in the build. So I wanted to make certain that I drilled and routed out my bridge pickup cavity in the correct spot, so it wasn't going to be too far forward, it wasn't going to be too far aft. And so it's a good idea to measure that stuff before you do that. It'll probably come out pretty close to the template. It might even be spot on the template, but it's a good idea to double check your math ahead of time and just be sure. So with the pickup cavities drilled and routed out in the correct spots, now you had to kind of connect them up for the wires from the pickups and drill some holes to connect everything up so that they all end up in the control cavity. So you're going to need a really long drill bit for that, not too thin, like 1/8 of an inch or something like that. It's just two little bitty wires that got to go through those. And just be careful when you do that, especially from the neck pickup cavity, because you don't want to mar the surface of the wood accidentally with your really long drill bit. So I took a steel ruler and placed it kind of underneath the drill bit as I drilled at an angle, just so I didn't mess up the surface of the guitar body. As I said earlier in the video, the truss rod that I used was a hot rod truss rod from StewMac, and you can put the adjustment nut on either end that you want. You can put it on the headstock end, or you can put it on the butt end of the neck. And I thought that it would be, for my first ever build, the easiest option was going to be to put it on the butt end. But I also had to be able to access the thing. So you'll see in this picture that I carved out, just with a Forstner bit, a small one, and then a chisel, I carved out a little access channel so that I could stick the adjustment wrench in and make truss rod adjustments as necessary without having to remove the entire neck to do that. At this stage in the build, we're getting pretty close to done. Everything is created, everything is shaped, everything is routed, everything fits. So this picture is just a trial run to see how it's all going to look and fit together. Here again, this is trial run, just dry fitting things. You can see in here that my saddles are very far forward, so they'll have a little bit of forward travel for adjusting intonation later, and they got a lot of rearward travel for adjusting intonation. But I got the pickups mounted in there and set, and then you'll see too that once again, sort of last opportunity to make certain I get the neck placed on there straight and everything will line up straight. So a dry run fitting of everything with a laser level, just again ensuring that everything is going to point in a straight line like you want it to. Now that I was satisfied everything was going to fit together right, point in the same direction, be straight, now it was time to fasten the neck on. So how I did that is I took the neck off, and I took the neck mounting plate and I put it inside of the control, or inside of the neck pocket cavity, about where I wanted it. And then I used a center punch to mark the 4 holes for the screws, and I drilled 4 holes from the inside of the neck pocket right through to the back of the guitar, so that when I put the neck back in the pocket, I would be able to drill holes into the actual neck. I could go from the back of the guitar right through the holes I had just drilled and into my neck. Now, just to make certain that I didn't mess up on this, once I got those holes drilled and I was ready to screw the neck on for real and mount and drill holes in the neck, I clamped it into place, and again I used a laser level just to make certain that I had everything pointed straight before I drilled those holes into the actual neck. At this point in the build, most of the stuff is substantially done, so I decided I was going to finish it using a product called Odie's oil. This one I think was an oil, not a wax from them. And you know, there's haters out there for Odie's, but I decided to go ahead and use that, and so that is what I did. So in these next couple of photos, you will see the finish. This is another reason why later I decided to go out and buy a drill press. When I decided I wanted to mount, I was ready to mount the bridge piece to the body. Well, there's like 4 or 5 mounting screws that go into that thing, and so I drilled from the top to the bottom, and even when you're trying to drill straight, that drill bit will wander on you, and you can see in here that they almost came out symmetrical and in line, but not quite. You know, that again is another one of those things where if you're just using a hand drill, you have to kind of tell yourself that you're okay with a little bit of, I don't know, custom look to your guitar. One of the fun things about building a guitar is it's so many different skill sets. It's a lot of woodworking stuff, it's a lot of measuring, but it's more than that stuff as well. It is learning how to solder. If you've never soldered anything, well, there's a technique to it, but it is something that you can learn, and I had never done it before, but I learned it, and it worked. So there's my first ever from scratch build, all put together except for strings. In this photo, I have my brand new Telecaster getting acquainted with its peers up in my rack of guitars. One of the things that I found out is that I had messed up on the frets because I didn't make sure that my fret slots were deep enough, and so I had a terrible fret job, and I ended up having to take the strings off, pull out all of the frets, buy all brand new ones, and resaw all of my frets, and this time put them in correctly and level them and crown them correctly. So that was a lot of rework and a lot of relearning stuff, but I sure did learn a whole lot going through that process. So one of the things that I did on my refret job is I bought an arbor press, a fret press, and I bought this one from Solo Music Gear. Their fret press is about half the price of the one from StewMac. It does the exact same thing. And what I learned later is that it's a nice to have tool, but a fretting hammer does just as good, I think, if not better. So now the guitar was finished, and here's a couple of photos of it just out on my porch. I play it, and it has become since then my favorite guitar, both because of the amount of work that I put into it. It was a lot of fun in the project. Also just because I kind of like the way it sounds. So thanks for watching my video. Hope you learned something out of it. I intend to try and post more of these. When I made my first guitar, I wasn't thinking about making videos at all. But you know, this is not a flashy, fancy workshop. It is, and I don't intend to have you know, a movie set or a video set disguised as a workshop. This is really just for people that want to learn how to build a guitar from somebody else who's learning how to build a guitar, and just kind of like share information. So again, thanks for joining. Here's my guitar.